and welcome back to my kitchen. I am totally overwhelmed. We are at the height of our garden produce season. We are just hauling in all sorts of goodies from the garden, and so I feel like my life is in chaos right now. But today I would like to talk to you about how I ferment sauerkraut. And I know that fermenting is kind of a scary thing for a lot of people. But I encourage you to give it a try, and I hope that I can help to kind of take the fear out of fermenting for you. So we're going to start with shredding our cabbage. And before you start cutting up and shredding your cabbage, what I do is I take a couple of those nice outer leaves and I just peel them off and I wash them and I leave them set aside. And we're going to use this in our fermenting process kind of as a blanket on top of all of our shredded cabbage. So make sure that you have one or two really nice sized leaves from the outside of your cabbage set aside and waiting for you. And then, of course, avoid the core of the cabbage. You know, cut around the core. You can shred it up on a kraut cutter. Actually, one year when I had a lot of cabbage, I used the KitchenAid food processor, which worked out just amazingly well because with the KitchenAid food processor, everything just kind of goes in the top and falls out the bottom into a container for you. That worked really well. Today, I'm only doing 5 pounds, and so I just hand shred it up. I just cut it up with a knife. So however you want to cut your cabbage up, you know, you just go ahead and get that job done. It's really, really important to, after you have shredded or cut your cabbage, that you weigh it, okay? This is really the only important thing, the most important thing, is weighing your cabbage. And I do that just on a regular, you know, kitchen scale. And what I do first is I weigh my empty container and I zero out the scale so that I know exactly where I'm starting from. You know, it removes then the weight of the empty container off of what you have in it after you fill the container up. Hopefully you're following that. But anyway, 5 pounds of cabbage is what we're starting with. I'm going to get you aimed down here. So this is my shredded cabbage, and I haven't even really fluffed this stuff up or anything yet. I just cut it with a knife and I have it in a great big, a nice big container. So to 5 pounds of cabbage, you are going to place 3 tablespoons of salt. Now, the salt choice in this really is very important too. No table salt with iodine or fillers in it. And I really don't even like using my pink Himalayan salt in fermenting either. You can see I have coarse sea salt. You can use sea salt, you can use kosher salt, you can use canning salt, all right? And 3 tablespoons per 5 pounds of shredded cabbage. And don't heat them up. Make sure that they're level tablespoons. And what you're going to do is you're just going to sprinkle that right over your cabbage. 2 and 3. And I know a lot of people talk about how labor and time intensive it is to pound their sauerkraut. Believe me, you guys, I really don't work at this hardly at all. This salt is going to macerate just like how we do with fruit, with putting sugar over fruit and we allow it to sit, and that sugar kind of draws the natural moisture and juices out of your fruit, like strawberries and apples and things like that. This salt is going to do the same thing with this cabbage. So just sprinkle the salt on that raw cabbage and then just kind of mix it around. And every so often, like every maybe 15 minutes, I'm going to come back and I'm going to see if I can mix it a little bit more. Because what we really want to have happen is we just want that salt to start kind of bringing out that natural juice from this cabbage. And we're not going to spend any time or any effort mashing and pounding this right now. We are seriously just going to allow the salt to do the work for us. All right? So I'm going to, every 15 minutes, I'm going to come over and I'm going to stir this, mix it up a little bit more, and just allow it to rest again. And I'm going to do that for an hour, okay? And at the end of that hour, I will come back and I will show you the next step. Okay, so every 15 minutes, I kind of came over and I stirred up my my cabbage and salt. Now, you will find that after an hour, it has really shrunk already. It is a lot more moist. There's even sometimes a little bit of juice in the bottom of your pan. And you have done no real massaging or pounding or anything. The salt just does all of the work for you. All right, so after an hour, every 15 minutes, I kind of came over and I kind of stirred my cabbage. So I've allowed this just to kind of sit for an hour doing those 15 minutes stirring to make sure that the salt was incorporated all the way throughout the cabbage. You can see, you guys, my container was almost full, and now it's already kind of shrunk itself down to about half the size that it once was, okay? Now this is where I start massaging. I just take and grab and kind of squeeze. And you can pound it with your fists. If you do have a kraut stomper, it's like a big, almost like a big wooden mallet. You know, you can use that too. But really, you guys, most of the work was already done by the salt. So it doesn't take hardly any time at all to really work this and get it softened up and juiced up a little bit more with your hands. And what we're doing is we're kind of bruising, technically we're bruising the cabbage to release more juice. And what we want at the end, before we start the actual fermentation, what we want is we want enough juice from this cabbage that it will cover itself. So I'm just going to sit and work on this for a few more minutes, and then I'll come back. All right, guys, so I have massaged and pounded my cabbage for approximately 5 minutes is all right? And I feel like I'm going to have enough fluid at this point in time to cover my cabbage. Now, 5 pounds of cabbage fits really nicely into one of these gallon-size pickle jars, you know, like the restaurant-size pickle jars. And that's really what I like to ferment my kraut in. And however you want to get that kraut into that jar, you just shove it in. And yeah, it is kind of messy at this point in time, but you know, you just got to do what you got to do. And we want all of that good, that brine that we made inside of our dish, we want all of that to go into that container too. That is really important stuff. Alrighty, so we have it all in there. And now what we're going to do, I'm going to move it down to this lower area here again. Now we're just really going to press that stuff down, guys. Really press hard and compact it down. And you can see all that fluid that's on top? That's exactly what you want. You want enough fluid to cover your cabbage completely and have like maybe about 3 inches of excess brine on top, and just really compact it down in there. Now is where we are going to take those leaves that I said to hold on to, those leaves from the outside of the cabbage. This is what's going to hold your kraut, all of your little shredded pieces of cabbage. This will kind of trap them down there, kind of like, I think I called it, it's like putting a blanket. It's like tucking your cabbage in for the night, and you're covering it up here with this little blanket of cabbage leaves. And I just kind of carefully press it down, trying not to get any of those shreds of cabbage up at the top and floating. And sometimes it helps if you can kind of curl your cabbage leaf down towards the bottom of your container. Sometimes that helps trap all the shredded pieces. Any shredded pieces that are going to float at this point in time are going to have to come out of the jar, okay? Now, what we want to do is you can buy either normal fermenting weights, which I have those. They're round glass discs, and they kind of have a groove and a knob in the middle. You never want to weight this down with anything metal, okay? You always want to use glass. And you can also do this in a plastic container too. Like if you have a plastic ice cream bucket, or if you're going to make large amounts, you can even do it in a 5-gallon plastic bucket that's food safe. And when I do fermenting in that large of an amount, what I do is I invert a dinner plate upside down to press all of my items down underneath the brine, and then I place a weight on top of that plate. But since I'm working with my jar, I just use fermenting weights. And all of the ones that you can buy nowadays, they don't look like the ones that I'm using here today. But you just go ahead and you get yourself some fermenting weights from either online. I think that even Walmart carries fermenting weights these days. Another little handy trick is if you have these old glass canning jar inserts, and yes, I do still use these for canning, but if you have these old glass inserts from canning jars, these make really good weights also. So I just cover that whole leaf area up, and then I'm going to press down just firmly but forcefully, okay? Because we want everything underneath the surface of the brine, including those cabbage leaves that you used as your blanket to tuck in all of the little shreds. You want those cabbage leaves underneath that brine also. All right. I think we're tucked in safely. I don't like how this particular weight is up above the brine, so I'm going to try to see if I can't live without that one in there. You want nothing sticking up above the brine. Now, I don't know if the camera is picking it up exactly or not, but any little bits and pieces of cabbage that are floating on the surface of that brine, you guys, you need to fish them all out. They cannot be floating like that. Anything that floats on the surface of the water is going to have the tendency to spoil and mold. So you just want nothing floating on top of that brine, okay? And you also don't want anything on the sides of your jar. And what I do is I take a clean laundered washcloth or even a clean paper towel, and I'll just take and kind of wipe around the top edge of my jar just to make sure that I'm not giving any room for anything to start spoiling. Okay, I see one more floater in there. Got to get him out of the mix. All right, found a couple little strays here. Alrighty, I think we're looking good. Oh, see one more. Time consuming, right? But believe me, the pickier you are at this point, the more successful your ferment is probably going to be in the long run. Alright, so I've wiped the sides of my jar. And now what we're going to do is we are going to take a clean and laundered tea towel. Alright, this isn't a terry cloth towel, this is a cotton tea towel. Now ferments really need to breathe, you guys. They need to breathe. But it will also, the smell will also attract things like flies and gnats and things like that. So what I do is I cover my jar with my cotton tea towel, and then I take a rubber band and stick it over the top. Now this does lots of things. It allows your ferment to breathe correctly, it keeps the bugs out correctly, and it also protects your ferment from too much light, okay? And ferments do not like to be in the sunlight. Now, I'll just get this set up on the counter for now. You don't want to slosh that thing around really at all at this point either, because what that's going to do is that's going to unsettle everything that you've packed down there, and you'll probably have more floaters. Okay, so this does best, and all ferments do best, in between a temperature of 70 to 75 degrees, okay? If it's much warmer than that, it's going to ferment too quickly, which can cause spoiling problems and molding problems. If it's too much cooler than that, it's not going to ferment fast enough, and you'll run into issues. So if you can kind of keep it in that range of 70 to 75 degrees, that's what it really loves the best. Now, you can leave this anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 weeks. That's just all depending on your personal preference of taste. And every 2 days throughout this entire fermenting process, every 2 days, and I'm just begging you to please write it on your calendar or put it in your calendar, set an alarm in your phone. Every 2 days, you need to check this ferment, and you need to carefully skim off anything that you find floating on top of that brine. And just try not to take too much of the liquid brine with it. Just skim off any little cruddies, okay? If you don't do that, you can have molding problems. And mold causes people to worry. It is not uncommon to have mold occur in your fermentation, all right? It's not uncommon at all. But the sooner you catch it, when they're just little itty bitty tiny little spots, the better. You know, when you have this huge mass of mold all in like a carpet on top of your ferment, then yeah, you have something to worry about. But if you're skimming this, if you're checking it and skimming it as needed every 2 days, you're not going to have any problems at all, okay? So keep this in an undisturbed place, but where you're going to remember it and check it every 2 days. And then you decide when you feel it's fermented to your taste preference. And what I do is always, of course, working with clean hands, always do that. I remove the fermenting weights, and I'll remove those cabbage leaves off the top, and then just take a little pinch and give it a taste. Now, if it seems like it's super, super salty, that means it's not finished fermenting yet. Just allow it to go longer. We really prefer our kraut at 6 and sometimes even 8 weeks. We like it to be really strong. And the longer it ferments, the less salty the flavor is too. So if you're finding that it just tastes terribly salty to you, it's probably because you haven't allowed it to ferment long enough. All right? Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. I believe I covered everything. I'm just going to pause one last time, and I'm going to go and get some sauerkraut that has been fermenting now for about 4 weeks, and I'll show that to you and let you see how that looks. Okay, so I'll be right back. All right, so I am back with the ferment that I've had going here for the last couple of weeks. This was today's one that we just did, and this one is about 4 weeks along at this point in time. Let me see. Let me turn it so that you can see what's going on here. Well, maybe I'll aim the camera up so I'm not trying to tip it. There we go. This is 4 weeks along, and you can see that dark green leaf on top. And look at how beautiful that looks, you guys. And I have been skimming this every 2 days without fail. Every 2 days I've been skimming it. I see that leaf is kind of poking up a little bit, and I don't want it above the brine, so I had to shove it back down. It smells like sauerkraut. It's fresh. It's pungent. It's a little tangy. It just has a really good fermented smell. Now, if something does start smelling a little bit off in your ferment, now you're going to be checking it every 2 days. Generally about a week along sometimes is when you run into troubles. And if you find that it's really smelling off, musty smelling, or how else can I describe the smell? Musty or old or stale, like that. Sometimes adding just a little additional salt can help bring it back. It's really hard to correct ferments, to be honest with you, but I have done it before. I have caught them and I have been able to pull them back into that safe zone again. You know, lacto-fermentation with the salt, what that does is it causes, it creates a area of good bacteria growth, but bad bacteria cannot grow in it. So that's the purpose of the salt. And if you haven't added enough salt, then sometimes that bad bacteria can start growing. And so if you find that it's maybe not smelling like what it should, sometimes if you add about another half a teaspoon of salt, you can pull it back and you can correct it. But that also comes with experience. I cannot guarantee you success on that. I have been fermenting for years and years and years, and so I'm pretty much on my fermenting game, but it's taken me a lot of years to get all of this experience under my belt, and sadly, that's just how all of us have to learn. But anyway, so that is a ferment that is about a month along, and like I said, I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to do those every other day inspections of your ferment, and particularly to skim off anything that you see growing at the top of your ferment or floating on the surface of your brine. I guess really what I didn't do is with the ferment that we did together here today, I guess I didn't show you what it looks like completed, but here we are. There's our future sauerkraut all pressed underneath there with that nice cabbage leaf and the weights on top. All right, so I am going to cover this back up and set it aside for quite a few weeks and just let it do its own magic. And like I said, you can periodically taste it, anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 weeks. Go ahead and give it a little taste and see if it is at that point to your liking or not. Now, the wonderful thing about ferments is all of the wonderful probiotics. This is really, really a good source of probiotics. Heating destroys probiotics. So if you are fermenting your sauerkraut specifically for those good probiotics, I do not suggest going on and canning it for shelf stability. Keep it in your refrigerator. It will stay in the refrigerator pretty much indefinitely, okay? Now, if you're making your sauerkraut because, like, in our family, we're just good Germans and we love sauerkraut, if you make it in such large amounts and large volumes that you just can't keep these open ferment containers, you know, all over in your house and whatnot, and you need it to be shelf stable, you can, after the fermentation process is complete, you can pack it into quart-sized jars and hot water bath it or steam can it for 15 minutes for quarts. If you were going to do pints, just do 10 minutes hot water bath or steam can. And what I do is I pack the sauerkraut fairly firmly into my quart jar, and then I just top it off with a little bit of that fermentation brine, and I leave approximately 1 inch headspace, and then I go ahead and I hot water bath or steam can. Well, I steam can. You guys all know that's pretty much all I do is steam can. If it calls for a hot water bath, I'm going to be steam canning it. But anyway, that makes a shelf-stable sauerkraut for years and years and years. The only drawback to that, if it's important to you, is that the probiotics have then been destroyed because of the heating process. My theory on that is that I have enough homemade other ferments, kimchi and kombucha and home fermented vinegars and things like that. Also yogurt. Yogurt has probiotics in it. You guys, there's a lot of other places to get probiotics and natural good probiotics, not just pill form. And so sauerkraut is just not one of the things that I really worry about keeping huge amounts on hand without actually canning it up myself. But that's just us in our family. You do you, I'll do me. But anyway, like I said, you guys, it's actually really simple. If I can do this, you can do this, I promise, okay? So hopefully that answered a lot of your questions, and hopefully you found it informative and helpful. Thank you so much for spending your time again with me today. God bless you all, and happy canning, everybody.